This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
What we see in the West here is, of course, the devastation in Gaza, which is extensive, no question. But the areas removed from the borders with Gaza and the border with Lebanon are pretty much untouched. We work with Aaron and Eddie Lipkin Tours, and they live in what the world calls the West Bank. I'm really trying to drop that phrase from my vocabulary because Israelis consider it kind of an insult. I mean, the West Bank of what? West Bank of the Jordan River, which implies that it's still part of Jordan or should be an independent state of its own. No, it's Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. 80% of the Bible's history takes place in Judea and Samaria. So Aaron and Eddie live in a community in Samaria, and they say for them, life goes on pretty much as normal because Hamas wouldn't shoot a rocket in their direction because they've got Arab villages all around and their rockets aren't very accurate. So they would not want to hit an Arab village because, as I will discuss in this talk, the end game for Hamas is to try to emerge, not just survive, but to emerge in control, not only of Gaza, but of the West Bank as well. Well, there I did it again, of Judea and Samaria. So other than that, we spent the week in Jerusalem and life went on as normal, except that we could tell right from our entry. And what I'm going to do here, by the way, just to preface my talk, it's the old tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. I'm going to go through our itinerary for the week just to describe what we saw, for lack of a better narrative thread, tell you what we saw and our reactions to it, and then kind of summarize with some things that we learned from the people that we talked to on the ground there. When we arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, it was pretty clear that things were not normal. When we were there last year, that really wasn't normal either because there was a 4-year backlog of tourism. We had hoped to go back in 2020. Our previous tour would have been 2019, and we couldn't go because of the lockdowns. So 2023 comes along, 4-year backlog. Tourists from all over the world were there. We had tourists from North America, Europe, China, lots of Chinese tourists, a lot of African tourists, and all of them hitting Israel at the same time. It really was overwhelming. But even the previous tour in 2018 was 2019 and 2018, there was always a crowd. You get through passport control, there's a line there. They've got a dozen or a dozen and a half little kiosks with border control officers checking passports and asking you the typical questions. Why are you here? How long are you staying? We got there were 3 kiosks open and no waiting. 3 kiosks open, no waiting. And when we got to our hotel, a very nice hotel in the heart of Jerusalem, we were literally a block and a half from the prime minister's official residence. Most of the other guests in the hotel for the week that we were there, except for the last couple of days, most of the other guests were people who had been displaced from their homes along the border with Lebanon. So in previous years, we're at a hotel, we'd move hotels every couple of days, and we'd be at a hotel with a bunch of Africans or Europeans or whatever, Chinese. And here it was just a bunch of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Israelis from the northern part of the country who couldn't go home. There are 100,000 Israelis who have been displaced by this war, both in the Negev along the border with Gaza and in the north, about 60,000 from northern Israel. Some of the communities, by the way, that we visited last year, that when I finally get our tour video from last year done, hopefully this summer, you'll see one of the towns that we went through, a little village called Metula, which was on the way to the waterfall, which the author of the book of First Enoch is where he placed Enoch's delivery of God's message to the watchers, saying, God says, you're not getting back up here. That's in the far north of Israel, this waterfall that comes down from Lebanon and forms part of the Jordan River. That little village that we had to go through to get to this park is under fire on a pretty regular basis these days. So it's kind of stunning when you realize we were just there. And of course, during our tour, there's a similar thing that just happened. So Anyway, when you arrive at Ben Gurion, not only do you get through passport control and customs very quickly, which did not happen in our previous tours, you come in on the like the slide walk, I call it. There are all of these pictures, these posters of the 132 hostages that are still in Gaza after, what is it, 232 days now? More than 7 months away from home. And of course, there are questions as to how many of those 132 are still alive. But that, of course, is something new that we had not seen in Israel previously. So we were transported from the airport to the hotel. We stayed at a hotel called the Prima Kings Hotel, which is right across from a little square with a fountain on it called Paris Square, which we found out is sort of the semi-official place for protesters in Jerusalem. Whenever there's a protest, it's there. We wondered, this is a lovely little park. Why do they have these police, gates, these barriers, these barricades up there around the park? It's because they have to deploy them so often. They just leave them there. So when the protesters come, they've already got the barricades there to, keep them out of traffic and stuff. But we only saw protesters there one night. Contrary to what you may have seen on the news here, I don't know if they were showing you guys a lot of protests, families protesting, wanting the hostages brought home now, which is a thing that we saw pretty regularly around the country. Somebody is funding billboards around Israel, blaming Netanyahu for funding Hamas and not getting the hostages home. And I'll talk about that toward the end of this presentation. But we only had one night of protests out there, and they were very polite, actually. They made some noise. They had a shofar, and they were, banging a drum. But they started at 7 p.m., and they were over at 9:45. It's like, they must have had a permit or something, said be out of the square by 10 p.m., and they were. And that was it, just one night. We walked over to the prime minister's residence to see if there were protesters out there. Not once during the whole week. So nothing. There was a tent out there with a group that is, you're just reminding people, hey, there are still hostages in Gaza, but it wasn't unruly. They weren't doing anything. They were just there. I mean, you could, donate money to support the families and stuff. So that, in a sense, was very similar to what we saw last year when we were hearing from people back in the States that some Christian ministries, very popular Christian ministries, and I don't want to name names and throw anyone under the bus, were saying that Israel was on fire and the embassy had warned Americans to get out. The airport was closed. The parks were closed. And none of that was true. We had been at the national parks the day they were supposedly closed. The airport was open. The embassy didn't try to contact any of us. It was somebody who'd been fed bad information and was reporting it in good faith, I'm sure. But and I'll get to why I think some of that is happening, again, toward the end of this talk. But we should know by now, I mean, it's the same corporate media that's been telling us for, 7 years now that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. So why should we believe the news about Israel coming from the same media outlets? Our first day as a group, and the tour that we brought, I hesitate to call it a tour. We actually called it a solidarity mission. Last year, we went with 110 people. In 2019, I think we had 85, and we had about 85 the year before in 2018. This year, we had 7 people, plus Sharon and me. And we really tried to push this hard. And Joe Horn, God bless him, allowed us to promote it on the 5 and 10 updates for Skywatch TV. But people are concerned, understandably. Again, the media makes it seem as though Israel is under fire. And again, there are parts of it where people do have to be prepared to head for a bomb shelter in a hurry. But it's been that way for 75 years for those communities. The communities along the border with Gaza and along the border with Lebanon always have to be aware and listening for those air raid sirens. Our first day, the group went to Tel Aviv, and we visited several places in Tel Aviv. And again, this will give you an idea of why this was not a typical tour. We didn't want it to be. We wanted to see with our own eyes what was going on in Israel, what is going on, without the filter of the corporate media here in the West. We started at the Sheba Hospital Rehabilitation Center. This is where they're working with IDF soldiers who've been injured in the war. And we really didn't have a plan. I mean, it was really kind of awkward. We walk in there, and Sharon and I are introverts. You might not think so. You're seeing us, on a video screen or whatever, but that's a lot different than actually meeting one-on-one with people. The hardest thing I ever had to do in my life was outside sales. It really pushed me outside of my comfort zone. Getting in front of a group and teaching and talking, that comes easy now. I've got a passion for that, but meeting people one-on-one, that's hard. And so here we are in this hospital, and the doctors and nurses are like, "Why are you here?" God bless our tour guide, Yeshai Avatal, who's not afraid to talk to anybody. And so, excuse me, he got us oriented, and we went to a lounge where some of the soldiers who were wounded, and some of them with pretty severe injuries. One guy with his hand like it almost looked like a club of bandages on the end of his hand, with just his pinky finger sticking out. Big tough Russian guy who was clearly loved to laugh, which was wonderful. And while we were there, we got to talking with some of the people, and just they were just surprised. Why are you people here? I was like, well, we're from all over. We've got, these folks here are from England, and these folks here are from New Zealand, and the rest of us are from the United States. Yeah, but why did you come here? I mean, well, because we want to see what's going on. We want to talk to you and find out what you're experiencing. And we want to let you know that there are Christians around the world who are praying for peace in Israel, and let you know that we think you are doing the right thing, that you have a right to defend yourself against this death cult that is embedded in Gaza. And that is what it is. And for the first time all week, but this happened again and again and again, people were thanking us, not just the soldiers recuperating, but the doctors and nurses. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Because they have this impression from the American media that we all hate them. And the Israelis are really perplexed by this. It's like, what are we supposed to do? I mean, we try to defend ourselves and go after the people who murdered our brothers and sisters, cousins, grandparents, children, and they're hiding behind their people. What are we supposed to do? And the world is condemning Israel for this. And we just wanted to let them know that we are not our government. Our government is not us. One of the young ladies we met at that hospital was actually one of the hostages who'd been captured at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Suffered a very serious leg injury. She was released on day 50 of her captivity. Her name is Maya. Very pretty young lady, maybe 24, 25. And we didn't ask her what had happened to her, but you get to a certain age where you can read people, especially when you're older, and you can remember when you're young and you're trying to put on a brave face. She looked like she was just barely holding it together. Now maybe I'm misreading it, but Sharon agreed. She looked, even though she was talking like everything was fine and everything was cool, and it's all good, but here she is sitting in a wheelchair with her left leg bandaged up almost to the hip. And again, don't know what the injuries were that she sustained or what happened to her while she was in Hamas captivity. But if we were reading her correctly, there was something that happened there that she's going to have to process for the rest of her life. And again, there's still 130 of the hostages that are still being held, presumably because, again, there's question as to how many of them are still alive. Met a young man named Roy, who I need to send a text message to, because we got to talking and found out that he'd actually lived in the States for a while in St. Louis, which of course is where Sharon and I got married. I lived there for about 16 years. And for some unknown reason, he was wearing a Dodgers cap. So, Roy, if you were in St. Louis living there, working there, why are you wearing a Dodgers cap? I said, I don't know. I just like the look. Like, okay. And then he shared that he had gone to some auction at some point and he bought a Yankees cap, and he had a Yankees cap, very old, he said. And it was signed by some American baseball player. His name was Bobby Ruth. Is it Babe Ruth? Yeah, Babe Ruth. That's the one. Say, are you kidding me? He bought a baseball cap signed by Babe Ruth and had no idea. So anyway, I'm going to text that young man and say, look, send me your address. I'm going to send you a Cardinals cap and a Cubs cap. So you've got two of the better caps for your repertoire there. That was powerful. We were impacted by that, seeing these young people who'd, again, the soldiers, they kind of expected to be in harm's way, but that young lady was just there for a music festival. And, we can question her choices. The music festival was called trance music. And it's very repetitious, no vocals, and it's intended to induce an altered state of consciousness. But that doesn't justify what happened to them at 6:30 in the morning on October 7th. When we drove to, well, I'll get to that. We went to the site of the music festival. From there, we went to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, which is, you probably table there that's set for the Passover Seder with the empty chairs for the hostages that are still missing. It's much more extensive than that now. They've got a replica of a Hamas tunnel, which you can go through. The difference is that when you go in that tunnel, you're going to come out the other side. Some art displays and some other memorials there for the people who are still being held in captivity. The yellow ribbon, you might notice some Israeli politicians wearing those now. We've got our commemorative yellow ribbons that we brought home with us, which I'll start wearing on Skywatch TV here shortly. One of our tour guides from last year, Ron Silberman, who was a Messianic Jew, met us there for lunch. That was nice to reconnect with him. The thing that really struck us about all of this is that even there, in and around that square, and Tel Aviv is a very different place from the rest of Israel. Other Israelis refer to it as the country of Tel Aviv. It's there are two Israels. There's Tel Aviv and then everything else. That it's the site of the largest LGBTQ festival in the Middle East. And the rest of Israel is just not on board with the way Tel Aviv lives. Tel Aviv is very Western, very secular. But again, even there, the reminders of what happened and the solidarity of Israelis behind the idea that Hamas needs to be eliminated is constant. They may not be united behind Benjamin Netanyahu, but they are certainly united in this goal of eliminating Hamas, except for, a group that I'll talk about again at the end here. After lunch, we went to another place. We came back to Jerusalem, and we went to a Christian ministry called Bridges for Peace. And we volunteered for a couple of hours in the afternoon. This was unexpected. This was something that the Lipkins added to our itinerary. And, we didn't know about it until they handed us the card. Okay, here's your itinerary. Oh, what's this? Volunteer work. We basically put together food packages for Israelis in need. Now, Bridges for Peace, and you can find their website at bridgesforpeace.com, has been around for 50 years now. And it's got offices on like 4 continents: US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and several other nations. And basically, they are trying to heal the breach that has opened between Christians and Jews over the last 1,800 years. Until the early 2nd century, Christians were considered part of the Jewish community. mean, we might not think so from what we read in the New Testament, where we see the hatefulness of the Sanhedrin and the people who were jeering and spitting on Jesus on his way to the cross. But the fact is, historically, Christians were considered sort of the odd cousins of just an odd sect of Jews until about the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was 132 to 135 AD. And the reason there was a split then is because Simon Bar Kokhba, was declared to be the Messiah by a very prominent rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, who is still very much respected today, 1900 years later. Akiva said that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, and he was a brilliant military commander, and he actually led the Jewish rebels to some pretty impressive victories over Roman legions, destroyed a couple of legions. And the Emperor Hadrian decided to put an end to this Jewish problem once and for all, because they had the rebellion in 67, and now here they were, 60 years later, and they had another rebellion, or 70 years later, another rebellion. That's it. We're done dealing with the Jews. We're going to make them an example. So he sent his best commanders to Judea, wiped out the rebellion in the year 135, and then depopulated Judea, basically sold about 900,000 Jews into slavery, which ended any hope of an independent Jewish state until the Zionist movement in the late 19th century. Bar Kokhba, because he'd been declared Messiah, Rabbi Akiva was authoritative. So Jews were like, yes, okay, we'll follow him. But when he demanded that Christians follow him, Christians were like, well, wait a minute. Now, our scriptures say that when Messiah returns, he's going to be coming in the clouds in great glory. And we see you are standing on the ground, Simon. So you're not the guy. And so Bar Kokhba had a lot of Christians imprisoned, some mutilated by cutting off their thumbs and so on. And that led to some real bad blood between the Jewish community in Judea and Christians. And the enemy, by which I mean principalities and powers, cosmic rulers over this present darkness, Satan and his minions, has exploited that for the last 1,800 years. When Constantine legalized Christianity in the early 4th century, for a lot of Christians, it was like, okay, now it's time for payback. And Jews became the target of a lot of persecution from Christians, now that Christians had the upper hand in the Roman Empire. Jews with 1,800 years of history like that, and based on what they've been taught, they still think Adolf Hitler was a Christian, many of them. They are very uncomfortable with Christians generally. So Bridges for Peace works to say, look, we love Israel, we love the people, and we understand that we are just grafted, and we are the wild olive branches that have been grafted into the tree. So we are here to help you and support you. They will take food offerings, food baskets to the few Holocaust survivors that are still around, many of whom have no one left to help them. Others who are new arrivals from places where they're being kicked out, Jews arriving from places like, nations in Africa where they're being pushed out. There aren't many Yemenite Jews left, but they arrive, and oftentimes they've got nothing but the clothes on their back. And so they will supply them with food and other assistance and sources. So that's what Bridges for Peace does. And our little group, we packed up food baskets. Well, plastic bags, but, and we did like 4 pallets worth in the span of a couple of hours. And all of us were so touched by the opportunity to actually put our hands on something concrete that was going to help somebody in need in Israel. We've asked the Lipkins to put that on our tour for next year. Now, how they can, based on the size of that room, we kind of filled the room with 9 people. So if we bring 100, I'm not sure how we're going to, make that work, but they said they'll find a way to make it happen. So, but again, bridgesforpeace.com if you want to find out more about what they do, and if you're so led to support them, based on what we saw, we would encourage that. That was day one. On the second day, we went to the Negev. That's the desert in the south of Israel. That's the area at the western part of the Negev borders on Gaza, the area that was attacked on October 7th. Our first stop was the town of Sderot. Sderot is a city of about 35,000 people, and at its closest point, it's only half a mile from the Gaza border fence. This was the town where Hamas militants on motorcycles and pickup trucks made it into the city center and surrounded the police station there, trapped 30 people inside the police station, police officers and civilians, who were all killed in the firefight. We first went to the overlook. It's a hill overlooking a major highway that runs along the border fence, and you can see the border fence. I mean, it's a half a mile away, and we're up on this hill, and off in the distance, we can see columns of smoke rising from Rafah, and we can hear Israeli artillery. It was surreal, for our guide to tell us as we went there. Now, if we hear the sirens, I'll tell you what to do. Just know that we'll have 15 seconds to get to. Most likely, it will be fine. We'll probably just stay in the van and put your head down between your knees and, hands over your head. It's the old duck and cover thing from the 50s and 60s. And Sharon and I started laughing because we were thinking about, what was it, Chicken Run? Put your hand between your knees and kiss your goodbye, But we didn't experience any of that, thankfully. We were startled to see how close this town was. And as you looked off to the north of Gaza, how close the major city of Ashkelon is. Ashkelon was one of the busiest ports in the Mediterranean back as far back as the Middle Bronze Age, and it borders on Gaza. And this is, well, don't want to get ahead of myself here. Sderot was powerful for a couple of reasons. First, we went to a playground there. Our guide wanted to show us how the people of Sderot have managed to live normal lives while living right next door to an enemy that wants to kill them. The playground equipment, they've got these big caterpillars, probably, 40, 50 feet long, tall enough that an adult can stand up inside of them. So, good 6, 7 feet. The interior, maybe 6.5 feet high, made of concrete, built to withstand a Hamas rocket or a mortar round. So the children, when they're playing on the playground, know that when they hear the air raid siren, run into the green caterpillar and stay away from the opening, stay away from the door. What kind of childhood is that? And in fact, this particular playground had been hit by a rocket on October 7th. I got pictures of the shrapnel marks on the face of the big green caterpillar. It's astonishing, but for more than 20 years, the people of Sderot have normalized what is not normal. It's the way they put it. They've normalized what is not normal. Children playing on a playground with playground equipment built of reinforced concrete to withstand missiles and rockets and mortar rounds. And from there, we went to the police station that had been attacked on October 7th, or rather, the place where the police station once stood. Because the way the siege of the police station in Sderot unfolded, one of the Hamas terrorists it was in the middle of a residential neighborhood, all right? Apartment buildings on one side of the street. Looked like a typical residential development in any modern Western city, row of apartment buildings on the opposite side of the street, police station on, facing it. A Hamas terrorist had gotten up on the roof, a sniper on the roof of the apartment building. And when the Hamas pickup trucks and motorcyclists surrounded the police station, were firing into the police station, whenever anyone would try to come to the aid of the police officers, the sniper on the roof would pick them off. And we heard this from the deputy mayor of the city. As we were walking back to our van, we encountered the deputy mayor, who our guide recognized from news reports. And so he introduced himself. And so the deputy mayor told us the story, which is now enshrined on a mural on a wall facing the empty lot that used to house the police station. All that's left are some twisted bits of rebar coming out of the what had been the concrete foundation of the building, adorned with Israeli flags and little, memorial candles and things. It's been turned into a memorial site for the 30 people inside the police station who died, police officers and civilians. They realized that I should say an off-duty soldier realized that until they could get the Hamas sniper off the roof of the apartment building, they were going to have a real devil of a time trying to break the siege and free the police officers. So he found another soldier in the neighborhood and asked him for his gun. And the soldier's like, well, I can't give you my gun. There are regulations. That's against regulations. Well, he somehow got the gun from the soldier, an M16 rifle, and went into the adjacent building, one of the apartments there, broke out the bathroom window and leaned out of the window with this gun, no scope on it, and managed to fire a shot to take down the sniper on the roof. And that building, where that soldier who had borrowed somebody's rifle and without a scope from probably a good 100 feet away, managed to take down the sniper who had cover on that roof. They painted a mural that depicts an angel leaning out of the window with a bow and arrow and firing that arrow to the other building. But as it happened, by the time the sniper had been eliminated, the Hamas fighters had broken into the police station and killed everyone inside, barricaded themselves inside. And so then they became the besieged as the army and police from the surrounding area surrounded the building. They finally decided that the only way to end the siege was to bring in a tank and just destroy the building. And again, that's on a mural on a wall of a building across the street from what was the police station. The mayor of Sderot, whose name I forget, insisted that within days they cleared the rubble. And again, now it's just a parking lot, or it's not a parking lot. It is essentially, it's a memorial site, and they're going to build a memorial there to the fallen police officers. 70 people in all died in Sderot that day, October 7th, 30 in the police station, 15 more senior citizens who had been trying to get away in a van, and their van blew a tire. Trying to get out of town, they hit a piece of shrapnel or something and blew a tire. And while they were sitting there helpless, the Hamas terrorists came up and just shot them all where they sat in their van. I mean, I'm thinking of my mother in the nursing home and trying to get senior citizens out of the way. This was essentially what it was, trying to get them out of a war zone. And the van blew a tire, and 15 seniors gunned down in cold blood. From there, we went to the Nova Music Festival. This is called the Supernova Sukkot Festival, because this was being celebrated the weekend of the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. And you probably have seen the stories on it, so I won't go into detail here, but 364 people died at the festival. Another 40 were abducted and taken to Gaza. One young lady, as I mentioned, we met driving into the site of the festival. It was sobering because if you remember the drone shots of the road and how it was choked with cars that were burning, that they were stuck in traffic and the terrorists were just able to walk them down and just shoot them as they sat there trying to get away. You still see the scorch marks on the road. And every time you drive past it, you realize somebody died there. It's just a reminder of who Israel has been living next to for decades now. when Ariel Sharon turned over Gaza in 2005 to the Palestinian Authority, and then the Palestinian Authority representatives were murdered by Hamas when Hamas took over, the military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is who Israel has been living next door to since about 2006. So the site of the festival, which was not even supposed to be held there, by the way, the original site was elsewhere, and I heard a couple of different stories. One was further east in the Negev. Another, somebody said it was supposed to be in Tel Aviv. But either way, it was not supposed to be there on the border with Gaza. And it was moved just a few days before the event. So it's not like Hamas planned to hit this event because they didn't know it was going to be there. They moved it at almost the last minute. It's when they broke through the border fence and some of the, the paragliders are looking around and suddenly they see this big party with a couple thousand kids there. What a soft target. So they communicated with one another and they gravitated to the site. And that's why that was the single most devastating attack there of the entire day. The single most loss of life of Israelis since, in a terror attack anyway, since the founding of the state in 1948. But because of the 4,000 Hamas terrorists, so many of them gravitated towards this location east of the Gaza Strip. Other communities that might have been overwhelmed, even Ashkelon, the city to the north of Gaza, were spared. Sderot, where 70 people were killed, might have been even more badly hit. But it's just tragic that these kids who were there for this music festival wound up being like a flame for these moths to come and destroy. So it's been turned into a memorial site where there are pictures of all 364 dead and pictures of the other 40 who were abducted. Again, a very powerful site. A lot of people making trips to these locations. There is a sort of, I hesitate to call it tourism industry, but there are a lot of people who are making pilgrimage to pay their respects at these locations. The other site that we visited down in the Negev was a small village called Ofakim, 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 which was very badly hit. We walked into the community and saw a number of buildings still with massive holes in the walls. One of the homes that we saw, and we talked to people in the neighborhood there, the neighborhood trying to do something to bring in some income to help, support themselves, selling refreshments to people who are coming to visit. And there were, again, a lot of people, mostly Israelis, coming from the rest of Israel to see with their own eyes what had happened there. We talked with residents who shared their stories of what happened on October 7th. One fellow who had downloaded security camera footage from the camera on the front of his home, showing us how the family dog had been gunned down by the terrorists while it was trying to get back inside. The dog was terrified. He was no threat to the terrorists. He was trying to get in the house, and the terrorists shot him dead in the front door. And then they broke into the house. Now, I don't know if you've heard this story. A woman named Rachel Edry, a grandmother, she and her husband were at home, husband David, and 5 terrorists broke into the home. And thinking quickly and having some understanding of psychology, perhaps, she said, you boys look hungry. You boys look hungry. Can I cook something for you? Look, I've got something on the stove over here. And so she started feeding them and baking cookies and making coffee and, basically getting them to calm down, relax, and keeping, basically feeding them while carnage is happening outside. Gunshots, gunfire all around, explosions in the distance. And she's got 5 of these murderous terrorists sitting in her kitchen, and she's feeding them while her son, who's a police officer in the community, is rounding up help. She sees him out the window, doesn't give him away. She signals to him. There are 5 of them. After 20 hours, her son comes in with reinforcements, neutralize the terrorists, and that young man rescues his mother and father. We heard this story back in October as we watch I-24 News, the English language news channel out of Tel Aviv. And we never thought, we would see the house with this woman. I mean, this is an epic story. A Jewish grandmother defeats 5 terrorists with her cooking. You cannot make that up. But her home still has holes in the walls. And I think it was her grandson that was showing us the video of the terrorists outside. But the neighborhood there is just devastated, and they're just doing what they can by showing people this is what happened, leading tours of their neighborhood, and then asking for donations. So we passed my hat and we took up a donation for the community there. Rachel Edry, though, she is legend. Sadly, we were told that her husband had suffered a heart attack the week before we got there, and he had passed away. So we did not get to meet her, but we saw the site of that epic story. That night, Avi Lipkin came and gave us a talk on the situation. Have you ever heard Avi Lipkin give a presentation on the geopolitical state of affairs in the Middle East? That was riveting. In fact, I recorded that, and I'll be releasing that on YouTube. We'll see if that'll get us canceled, probably. I may have to edit some things out that Avi said just to get past the censors. We'll probably do the uncensored version on our app so that we don't have to worry about censorship there. But I just remember, and I had the opportunity finally to tell him that when I first heard him speak at a Prophecy in the News conference, probably 12 years ago, I thought he was really radical. That, boy, this guy is a hardcore Zionist. I'm not sure I can go along with this. Because I was still, indoctrinated by the Western media's impression of Israel. What was about Israel? Come to find out, everything that Avi was saying back in 2011, when I first started listening to him, he's been right. So, and we got to tell Aaron that as well. The next day, we went to a location called Gush Etzion. That's E-T-Z-I-O-N, Gush, G-U-S-H. You can look it up. It is a very powerful site. We visited a couple of times previously. It was a key battle, a one-sided battle in 1948 during the War for Independence. It was a kibbutz located along the road between Hebron and Jerusalem, and so a key, strategically important site. And when you go into Gush Etzion, the museum there, they've got a presentation, multimedia presentation, that dramatizes the struggle of the settlers there on the kibbutz, some of whom had come from Europe, some from America, one woman who survived one of the Nazi concentration camps. And, they dramatize it a little bit, but it's very, very well done. So you get to know the characters a little bit, put human faces with the names, and it tells the story of how they managed to get this kibbutz off the ground in 1947-48. But as things got closer to the United Nations vote authorizing the creation of a Jewish state and the Declaration of Independence on May 14th of 1948, they came under increasing attack by local Arab militia and the Jordanian army, which is called the Arab Legion. And that final push, it was really difficult because they were fighting with leftover weapons, things they could scrounge, and they had essentially been cut off from Jerusalem because there was just one road, and the Arabs knew it. And so relief columns had to come down that road, and were often getting turned back because they couldn't break through, or In one case, they did get a relief column, supplies, but the vehicles were ambushed on the way back and destroyed. And in fact, when you drive on that road from Jerusalem down towards Gush Etzion, the vehicles that were destroyed as part of that relief column are alongside of the road. They've been restored and turned into a monument, a memorial for the members of what they called the Palmach, which was the militia during the War for Independence, who had lost their lives trying to lift the siege of Gush Etzion. Finally, just numbers wore them out. They ran out of ammunition. They tried to surrender. And instead of allowing them to surrender, here's the story, the way it was told at the site. They had all the men and women in the kibbutz, 121 people, stand together. They said, okay, look, we're just going to take a picture. And so everybody just here, look in this direction. And then, of course, they opened fire with machine guns and killed them all, except for a few remaining members of the kibbutz who were in a bunker, down beneath, blast doors. And again, they're showing this to you in a well-produced Hollywood quality movie as we're sitting in there watching this. And you see this young couple that had just become engaged to be married, and the young lady is the one who survived the concentration camp, and the young man is just kind of a dreamer, a kind of a poet, and he's trying to get her to understand the gravity of the situation. Don't you understand? They're outside, they're out of ammunition. We can't. And she's saying to him, I've decided on the music for our wedding. So it's very well done, because it really makes it emotionally powerful, because what happened then, and this is historic, they opened the door and threw in a grenade. And that was the last of the survivors at Kfar Etzion. The children and most of the mothers had been evacuated to Jerusalem some weeks earlier. And when you watch this presentation and they conclude that with the grenade being rolled into the bunker, then they lift the screen, and behind the screen where you've been watching this film is the actual bunker. And so, everybody with us was weeping, including our 72-year-old guide who's seen that presentation probably dozens of times. But the story of Gush Etzion is that 4 of the children who'd been evacuated came back there in 1967 after Israel recaptured the territory from Jordan after the Six-Day War. And the only thing left standing of the kibbutz, the farmland that they had built, the buildings and everything, was a single oak tree, which is still standing on the site. So we were able to go and get our pictures taken there with the lonely oak. Very powerful. I guess the closest thing we Americans can compare this to would be the Alamo. And it just connects the dots between Israel's founding in 1948 and the existential struggle that it's facing right now with Hamas. Because Hamas is not just Hamas, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. In Jerusalem, we saw the sites that every tour would want to see, and I won't go into detail on these because, again, these are fairly typical, and I've talked about them in the past. The Mount of Olives, the actual historical crucifixion site outside the Church of the Pater Noster. We'd hoped to go in and see the burial tomb of Jesus under the Church of the Pater Noster. We found out that it's closed for repairs until October, so we didn't see that. But Gethsemane, we got up on the Temple Mount, and the Temple Mount was practically empty. First time we've seen that. We visited the city of David, saw the archaeological digs there, visited the Israel Museum, fascinating stuff for archaeology nerds like Sharon and me. We also went to the Friends of Zion Museum, which is a rather interesting experience in itself, in that you see that there have been Christian Zionists going back several hundred years who have helped facilitate the creation of Israel. Now, the conclusions that we reached from what we saw and also from the people that we talked to, and again, we encountered a lot of people who just came up to us because they could see we're not Israelis. We didn't dress like Israelis. For one thing, us guys on the tour, we weren't dressed all in black like most Israeli men for some reason. And of course, we're obviously not Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox. But in talking with them, without exception, we were thanked for making the trip over there, because Israel is come to realize that the world's perception of them is not matching what they are seeing on the ground in Israel right now. So the fact that there are a bunch of crazy Christians from 3 different continents who are willing to come together and tour, and not just go to tourist sites, not just go to, say, Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee and stuff like that. We went to Sderot, and the day after we were there, they were under air raid sirens again, and they have been every day since we were there. That made an impression on them. And we pray it plants some seeds for some reconciliation between Jews and Christians, because I've had some engagements on social media this week with people who are convinced that I have made Israel an idol. I disagree respectfully, because I've done enough reading on the history of Islam to understand what Israel is facing in the Muslim Brotherhood and its military wing. Israel, we have learned from people who are closer to the political situation there than we are, has a deep state. And Netanyahu is sort of Israel's Donald Trump. Now, he is a better politician than Donald Trump. He is much more polished in what he says in public. But like Donald Trump, his reputation may be bolder than he actually is. This is the impression of the Israelis that we've talked to. We in the West have this idea that Netanyahu is a bulldozer. He's a dictator. He wants everything his way, and he's going to do whatever he can to get it to really, because if that were true, he'd already have the judiciary reformed, and Hamas would have been crushed a long time ago. The impression of the Israelis that we trust over there is that Netanyahu is not as forceful as they would like him to be. He works within the system as much as he can, and because of this, he doesn't get things done that he wants to get done, because like our system in America, the left has co-opted it. They figured out where the pressure points are to apply power, so that even with a minority, and believe me, the liberals in Israel are the minority, but they can still hamstring the conservatives because they've got control of the judiciary, which still has the power to basically reject any law, strike down any law that they consider unreasonable, which is basically whatever the right wing wants to get through the Knesset. The other thing that we came away with was this, and I've heard some Christians make this statement, that this October 7th was such a disaster for Israel, and that the IDF and the Mossad and the Shin Bet are so competent that Netanyahu had to be complicit in letting this happen. This is not the case. It was not Bibi's fault. I repeat, this was not Netanyahu's fault. He was not complicit. The Mossad and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, made 2 key mistakes in that they depended on technology to replace human surveillance along the border fence. They believed that with AI and surveillance cameras, they would be able to secure the border fence and free up soldiers who could be doing other things, or just have fewer soldiers. And apparently, again, this is according to Israelis who are closer to the situation than we are, they believed the words of the Egyptians and the Qataris that Hamas is deterred. They have no intention of doing this because they know they could never win. So, no, you have nothing to worry about. And so during the previous government, you remember that when Netanyahu was voted out previously, his coalition fell apart, and this strange coalition led by Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett came together. Bennett, who's a conservative, Lapid, who's a liberal, and then you had the Arab bloc in there as well. First time that the Arabs have ever been part of the governing coalition. They expanded the number of work permits for people from Gaza to come over into Israel, because they believed that if we make the Gazans partners, where they benefit in the economic boom that is taking place in Israel, we'll have peace. So they expanded the number of monthly permits by a factor of 5, I think. And this was under Benny Gantz and Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, their government. What actually happened, according to news accounts, is that the Gazans who were going over and working in these kibbutzim in the Negev was conducting intelligence, surveillance. They found dead Hamas terrorists in some of these kibbutzim that had detailed maps of the villages that they had attacked, showing which homes had dogs, which homes were religious, and so they wouldn't be home on the day that they were planning to attack, the last day of the Sukkot festival, where the weapons were kept, where the police stations were located. This is what they did with these the expansion of the work permits. And again, this was under the government during the gap between Netanyahu and Netanyahu. The other thing is this, Bibi is not told everything by the army. And again, this is Israelis we know who are connected to people who are still in the military. Apparently, and this is where Netanyahu and Trump are very much alike. The military doesn't trust Bibi. We were told that the IDF, you have a very difficult time of being promoted if you're not a liberal, if you're not a socialist, basically. So the ones who are highest in rank, the ones who are going to report to the prime minister, don't share his political views, and they don't trust him. So they don't tell him everything. We saw similar things here in the United States with Donald Trump, with chief of staff not telling him everything, things that they don't want him to know. The intelligence community kind of tailoring the presidential daily briefing to leave out things that they don't want him to know because he might do something dangerous. Apparently, Israel's got a similar situation with the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu. So they withheld information, only told him what they wanted him to know. So here's the thing. The IDF knew what was going on the other side of the fence. They knew that Hamas was drilling for what they did with their bulldozers and tractors to go and tear holes in the fence at dozens of points to pour through. And either they believed in their own mythology that we're so powerful, Hamas is deterred, they're just doing this to, keep public support behind them, or they wanted to let it happen to take Bibi down. Because as we learned from Caroline Glick, who's a columnist, writes for the Jewish News Service, jns.org. Oh, Gloria just woke up. There are activists now who are protesting on the streets of Israel, the same groups that were protesting judiciary reform a year ago, protesting now, wanting elections now, get the hostages home now. It's Netanyahu's fault. It's all his fault. According to Glick, and this was found by messages on a WhatsApp group that were made public by Israel's Channel 14, which is their equivalent of Fox News, conservative news channel, that the activist who's coordinating these protests is taking marching orders from the Biden administration. According to this guy and these messages that were made public as he was sending them out to his WhatsApp group, to his followers, that Benny Gantz, who's part of this wartime cabinet, this unity government, agreed with the White House to join the government last October, but only for 6 weeks, and then to pull out, cause the government to crumble, and basically force Netanyahu out of power. Well, Gantz didn't do that, so they gave him another deadline, January 1st. That passed. Gantz didn't pull out of the government. They gave him another deadline, March 15th. Didn't happen. So finally they said, okay, you remember when Gantz came to Washington, D.C., which is kind of weird because, again, he's not part of the Likud party. He's not in Netanyahu's political party. He's opposition, but he joined for the sake of unity. He was summoned to Washington, D.C., and basically told his services were no longer required. And that's what the message that this radical activist was putting out there to his followers, and that he had been given the green light to start stirring up trouble on the streets. And his message was this: I would rather make Israel a colony of the United States than leave the right wing, meaning Benjamin Netanyahu and his party, in power. I was shocked, but this you can find this at Caroline Glick, jns.org, just a couple of weeks ago. And apparently, this is the game that's being played in Israel right now. And our friends over there who follow politics very closely, because it's right now literally a matter of life and death, they agree that this is what's happening. There is a group within the government and within the political class in Israel that doesn't care how they do it or how it affects Israel. They just want Bibi gone. Doesn't matter how it affects Israel. They just want Netanyahu out of office. It's like what's happening with Trump. They don't care what happens to the country. They don't care how they have to shred the Constitution to do it. And the precedents that they are setting with these ridiculous cases that they're bringing against Trump, they just want to keep him out of the White House because, like Trump, Netanyahu is an outsider. We were told, and I didn't realize this until this trip, that because he was educated in the United States, not in Israel, that he is not considered part of the club. To use the phrase Newt Gingrich used about Donald Trump, he's not a member of he doesn't know the secret handshake. And yet Netanyahu has managed to serve as Israel's longest serving prime minister, and the left in Israel is just going bananas. They would rather let Israel burn than keep Benjamin Netanyahu in power. That is what is going on. And so these conspiracy theories that are blaming Netanyahu are misguided, but understandable, considering that we in the West have this impression of the IDF and the Mossad as, well, they're the best in the world. Well, yeah, they are, but that doesn't solve the problem of hubris. And that is either what happened with the over-reliance on technology, or what do you want to call it? BB derangement syndrome, Netanyahu derangement syndrome, the hatred of Netanyahu that is so great that they were willing to let countrymen die, then let Netanyahu know what was happening and be ordered to stop it before they crashed through the fence. So in a sense, Benny Gantz, who really, really wants to be prime minister, and we're also seeing this now with the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who made a very shocking speech this week, contradicting Netanyahu. Netanyahu does not want either Hamas or Fatah to remain in control. Fatah is the Palestinian Authority, to remain in control of Gaza after the war is over. Gallant is saying, nope, we will not have a military occupation of Gaza. Okay, because that means that Hamas is going to remain in power, I guess, or somebody's going to remain in power, but it's not going to be Israel, which is not acceptable to most Israelis. The majority of Israelis want to see Hamas destroyed. Benny Gantz, in a sense, is willing to sell out the country so that he can be the prime minister. In effect, Benny Gantz wants to be the 21st century version of Herod. Remember Herod the Great? It was the king of Judea back in the time of Jesus, or just before the birth of Jesus. He became the king of Judea only because he went to Rome and got the backing of Caesar Augustus. So that makes Joe Biden Caesar in this scenario, which is hilarious, but also dangerous and tragic. That is what's happening in Israel right now. And it is almost incomprehensible that there are Israelis who would play politics with this situation to remove Netanyahu from office. But that is how our friends over there see it, and the evidence seems to support this. The end game, Hamas is playing for time. The longer they can drag this out, the more pressure is applied to Israel by the governments of the world. And if they survive this, especially if Israel gives any concessions and releases any of the Palestinian terrorists that they've got in jail for, a hostage here and another hostage next week, and then maybe 2 more hostages. If they can drag this out, especially if they can drag it out long enough that Mahmoud Abbas, who is 88 years old and not in great health, dies before this is complete, then Hamas can turn around and say to the Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria, see, we did what Abbas could not. Hamas is trying to string this out so that they get out of this not only surviving, but in control of Gaza and Judea and Samaria. And the reason this might happen is because you know that Hamas leadership is set up in Doha, Qatar, one of the wealthy Gulf oil states. And Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, says that Hamas is the front line of defense for Turkey, the Turkish homeland. Well, of course, because it's the military arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, which wants to restore the caliphate, which is based in Turkey. So you've got a NATO member, Turkey, and a Western ally, alleged ally, Qatar, basically with Hamas's back. This is a very dangerous situation for Israel. So this is what is going on here. Just remember this. If Hamas survives, it wins. But the Lord is watching over Israel. I don't think Hamas survives this. But we can see in the way this is playing out with world opinion turning against Israel, despite what happened just 7 months ago, a scenario where the world coming against Israel, in other words, the Antichrist leading a war against Israel to destroy it, take it for himself, to reclaim God's Mount of Assembly, the Har Moed or Armageddon. You can see how this could happen. We're seeing prophecy unfold before our eyes. Now, again, having said all that, tourism in Israel, still safe. You don't want to go down to Gaza like we did, or near Gaza like we did, and going up into the north is not really allowed. But Jerusalem, very safe. The historic sites around the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, all very safe. And I know from personal experience, and I think everyone who was on our tour would agree, that the Israelis deeply appreciate the support. We heard it every day from people, from Tel Aviv to Sderot. And so I'm very, very glad that we went. The small group that we had, I think every last one of us would agree that this was a powerful and life-changing experience.
God's creation is full of mysteries. What were the giants in the Scripture? Did dinosaurs roam the earth in the days of Noah? Are we alone in the universe? Join speakers Derek Gilbert, Rudy Landa, Michael Hoggart, Greg Patton, Mac Dominic, Josh Davis, and Micah Van Huss to explore the topics your Sunday school teacher didn't talk about at the Mysteries of the Bible Verse event in Cincinnati, Ohio, June 7th and 8th.
Summer reading season is just around the corner. We want to help you get ready.
You can buy fiction, you can buy nonfiction through the Gilbert House store, whichever you want. All of our books are 40% off. 40%.
That includes all 8 novels of the Red Wing saga.
Book 9 is coming, probably early summer.
My 2 novels, and then, of course, all of our nonfiction stuff, including our most recent books, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, The Second Coming of Saturn, and Veneration, a deep dive into the cult of the Nephilim.
April and May, you get 62 days.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
61. April only has 30.
Regardless, through the end of May, 40% off on all of our books at the Gilbert House store, available only online. Go to gilberthouse.org/store. You'll find all the prices slashed on our books, 40% off, gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support.